So I'm getting here to just removing the carrier and the charging handle. And this thing is so dirty and seized up that I couldn't actually pull it out when I separated the upper from the lower, so I had to actually put this thing back together and mortar it. But now that I've got this thing loosened up, let's take a look at it. Okay, so here's what the bolt carrier group looks like after about 400 rounds. Alright, let's go ahead and disassemble this bolt. Here we have my easy, fast, cheap retainer pin removal tool. And there you have the full disassembly. So in my opinion, there's no special sauce or anything like that to cleaning bolt carrier groups. I like to use Hops number 9 bore cleaner. This stuff works great, and you can find it basically everywhere. And then next, I like to use 12 gauge caliber cleaning patches, just because they have a lot of surface area and I can get a lot of carbon all over these, and they seem to do a pretty good job. And then finally, I like to use Q-tips. And then how I like to do this is I take my patch, take my cleaner, and then I just dab it on there like so. And then you simply just grab one of your parts, and I just rub it just like that. And all we're doing is rubbing all the surfaces here, trying to get all that carbon off. And you're not going to be able to get everything off, but we just want to get the bigger stuff off and the powdery stuff and the stuff that feels very coarse or rough. And for all intents and purposes, this is good enough. And then for the retainer pin, I just like to once go over it and just kind of rub it off and just get all the extra stuff off there. Same thing with the extractor retainer pin. And as I'm cleaning things down, I just like to take a look at everything. Like, one thing I always like to check is the firing pin tip and just make sure that it is not cracked or damaged and it looks normal. And as you can see, you can get pretty far with one of these patches. And I'm not trying to get anything perfect, but just to wipe off all the surfaces and get things cleaned. It's good enough for me. And then one more little tip on the cam pin here. I just wet the Q-tip and to clean the inside. Once these are wet, you can kind of sneak them into tighter places, and that will get the rest of the debris out there. But as you can see, a dry piece, it's very tight and it's really hard to squeeze through there. Whoops. Now let's move on to the bolt. So I like to start off with the bolt, just wiping things down like so, and get as far as you can on one patch here. It is a much bigger surface, so it usually does take a few patches. Just try to get as far as into those nicks and crannies as you can. As you can see, this thing is filthy. And then one note back here, you're going to have a lot of carbon buildup on here. Some people like to clean this off. I personally just leave it because it self-cleans itself. That's a really weird way of saying that. The bolt tail will just, because it rubs up in the carrier, it'll actually self-clean. It'll rub all this stuff off. But this junk will obviously just stay there and slowly it'll build up, and it never really has affected me, so I just leave it. And if you leave it, that is best practice, just so you don't damage your bolt or damage the finish. And yet again, nothing is going to be perfect, but I'm just trying to get the bigger stuff. And then let's clean out this cam pinhole. So this is where the Q-tips come in handy. Just like to take that and go in there. Just do the best we can. And then next, let's clean these lugs. So this is what I really like Q-tips for. I usually like to start, I find where the extractor goes, and I usually like to start on one side, and I kind of just go on there and rub it and rotate this Q-tip as we go along to get to clean the surfaces here. And after a few, once your Q-tip gets dirty, or you get about halfway, go ahead and dunk the other end in there. Just continue on. And then I'll go for one more, just to make sure we get everything out of there. Okay, next let's clean out this area where the extractor sits. Again, I like to take a Q-tip and then get some of your cleaner on there. And this just allows you to get into these crevices in there, just the places that are hard to get. And as we can see, that looks much better. So last thing on this bolt carrier group, and I do not do this every single time, but one of the things that's going to happen is if you shoot your gun enough, you're probably going to have some sort of a seizure with your firing pin. And what that means is when you go to fire the gun and your hammer hits the firing pin, it's going to get caught up in here, and it's going to give you a light primer strike on the primer. So what I do every single time when I clean my gun is I insert the firing pin, and just to make sure, you just move it back and forth, see if there's any abrasions in there. See if there's anything that's holding this up. See if there's anything that's not allowing this to move very smooth. And obviously this one is doing good because I probably cleaned it out last time. But this is such a very small area, it's hard to get in there. A technique that I've found that works well to clean this area where the firing pin goes is I grab some bar stool, and then make sure you have this red thing that shoots in there. And all I like to do is squirt a little bit of this in there. Get it all in there. Just like so. And then take my firing pin, put that in, just move it around in there to loosen everything up. And that seems to do a pretty good job at loosening things up. What you can do as well is take a Q-tip and insert this into here, and you can probably get about that far, and I've done that in the past, but what the problem is, you can actually get these stuck, and then you have to worry about getting that unstuck, which is not too much of a problem. But using a Q-tip is not my first recommendation to cleaning the firing pin channel. I would use this technique, get it lubricated in there, take your firing pin, move it around, and unfortunately you're not going to be able to get everything out, but you can kind of do the best you can to wipe that off. And then once you get this thing lubed up, I just like to take a Q-tip and kind of just go over those areas where there is some extra lube. And again, I don't like really shoving that in there because it does get stuck, but just do the best you can and get those spots where there's extra lube. Put it back in here, move it around, and then just wipe the excess off the firing pin. And I found that works quite well. That will get rid of your debris. You might have to do it a few times if it's really bad, but if you do that every once in a while, that's a good way to maintain that firing pin channel. To clean the bolt face, I just like to take a Q-tip and obviously just rub the top there and do the best you can. And then one thing I also wanted to mention with the lugs is once I clean these, once they're clean like that, I like to just go in there and take a close look and make sure that there's no cracking, none of them are broken, and they're all in good condition. And with a short platform like the Mark 18, the bolt is going to take much more abuse on a shorter barrel like a 10.5. But yes, that is my simple process to clean the bolt. It's nothing crazy. And I like to clean the bolt anywhere between 300 and 1,000 rounds. It really depends on the conditions I'm in. It depends on how dirty it gets, and if I'm just going to the range or whatever I'm doing. But I usually don't like to go past 1,000 rounds. Once you get around that point, every time you load a magazine or every time you try to chamber a round, you have to use the forward assist. And that is a good sign that your gun is dirty and needs to be cleaned. Okay, and then let's go ahead and reassemble this. First, I like to take my extractor, set that in there, extractor pivot pin, put that in on one side like that, and then I usually like to put it down on a firm surface and push it in. And then once you get this far, I like to take the edge of the table or counter and kind of finish it off, but because of the camera angle I can't really show you that. So we'll just take this retainer pin and just finish it all the way off. And when you insert this, you don't want to feel it, you want it to be smooth on both sides. And obviously you can see on this side it's protruding a little bit there, so we want this to be flat. What you can do to kind of barely push it in is, instead of pushing on the pin, just kind of roll this over the top. And that will allow you to just barely get it. And as of right here, it looks perfect. It looks very even, and nothing is protruding on either side.